Hi guys, this is my Panasonic G7. I bought this in 2015. I still use it. I bought this, the GH5, in 2018. I still use it. I have loved the Panasonic system for quite a while. I recorded my first son's birth with this one right here, and even more important things like my YouTube videos. But I have never used a Panasonic like this. Here is the S5 II, and while not a perfect camera, it is about as close as I have ever seen. So let's talk about it. So first of all, a huge shout out to Camera Canada for sending this guy over. I've had him for about 3 months. I don't think they realized how long I had him, and they asked for it back. So finally, I have to send it back tomorrow. I'm very sad, but it also means I'll probably just purchase this camera or the S5 IIX. And even though I have a lot of Sony cameras for my personal work, this S5 II fits the bill for a lot of things that I like to shoot. So now I'm going to try to include as much as I can about this camera, the good and the not so good. I will leave timestamps in the description if you want to skip around, but watch the whole thing. Why wouldn't you do that? Give yourself a treat. Watch all Marky. So first I'll just talk about the build quality and the ergonomics before I get into the specifics. I have loved the way Panasonic, they put the ISO and the white balance and the exposure compensation up there. You got the PASM dial. You got a nice big red record button. Where is it? Right there. You got your, I'm looking at this backwards in the monitor. You have your shutter speed here and your aperture over there. Seriously, why can't I figure that out? And then here on the side, I love this dial here because it has a little time-lapse feature. You can go into your burst mode, or you can take single shots, your timer function, or your high-resolution picture function. The camera feels nice and solid. It's got it's got a deep grip, and even though I'm a very manly man, the manliest of men, my hands are about average size, and I just love the way that feels. I can carry that around all day. I don't like to use shoulder straps or anything like that. I just like to carry a camera in my hand when I'm out and about taking photos and videos, and then I just dare the criminals to try to rip it from my hand. They can't, because I'm the manliest of men. It's got a fully articulating 3-inch LCD, which is 1.84 million dots, so it's a good LCD screen. I find it's better than most of the Sonys, but not as good as some of the Canons. I find that the Canon screens just look better to my eye, but still, this one is a good screen. And the EVF is also quite good. It has a 3.6 million dot EVF, which is a nice step up from the S5, the original, which is 2.36 million dots. Of course, you have your mic jack and your headphone jack and your USB port for power delivery and charging. And of course, the old HDMI, full-size HDMI. Panasonic, they wouldn't do you dirty by giving you a micro HDMI. They love them. I love them for that. On the other side, you have the 2 card slots. You need that. You're getting paid. You want redundant recording, 2 card slots. It's got a nice size battery. I will put the record times and the shoot times up on the screen. Also has a great menu system. Very intuitive. Even though there are a lot of features, it is always easy to navigate a Panasonic menu system. It's my favorite menu system overall in the camera world. Now let's get into some of these features. At $2,000 USD, this is ridiculously feature-packed. So let's just start with the 6K open gate. Panasonic will just let you record the whole sensor and let you do what you want. If you want to do 16:9, just cut the top and the bottom off and put that in your timeline. But if you wanted to do, say, vertical video, you just smush the sides in right there. And that could be very useful for people who want to go back and forth between vertical video and regular horizontal video, and they don't want to reshoot their B-roll, let's say. Now for me, what I actually like to use is the 5.9K, because that comes out 16:9, but now I have 5.9K, and then I can do things like zooming, like I have my own little dolly, or like a slider. I pan, I can reframe, I can punch in, and I can still output in full 4K. And also the 5.9K is a little bit sharper than the 4K if I'm comparing it side by side. Even though the 4K is downsampled from 6K, still when I look at it on the timeline, when I take off the 5.9K footage, it looks a little bit better. So I like to use the 5.9K for the reframing and also the extra sharpness. Great video assist tools like shutter angle. I wish everybody would do shutter angle. I just set this at 180 degrees and I am good to go. The other day, I literally ruined a shoot. I was doing like a tripod thing and I wanted to get B-roll of the tripod. I was walking with the tripod on my shoulder. It looked epic. Epic sauce, as the kids like to say. And I was trying to do it in 60 frames per second, but I forgot to put the shutter speed at 120. It was too low and it was all choppy and it looked like garbage. But if I'd had 180 degree shutter rule, I wouldn't have ruined that shoot. And also combined with synchro scan, if you have flickering lights, LED, you're probably going to be able to combat that situation. I used to shoot a lot at this one comedy club and it had flickering LEDs. The only camera that I could bring was the GH5 because I could dial the shutter angle in just right, and then that flickering light would stop. It's got waveform and vector scope built right in. Now normally it's a little small, and normally you'd be using an external monitor to see those things, but it's nice if you don't have your external monitor to have those right in the camera. Oh dude, the live cropping. I love this feature on this. I liked it on the GH5, but it's even better on this because it spits out a 4K file. So with the live cropping, you can just pick one point on your screen and then pick another point on the screen, and when you can choose 20 seconds or 40 seconds, and it'll just record and make a smooth shot, just like a panning shot with the live cropping. Look at this tripod that I do a lot of tripod reviews apparently. Just look at this. It just goes nice and smooth. I love it so much. That's worth the price of admission right there. It's one of the reasons I am heavily considering the S5 II or the S5 IIX, because that saves a lot of time. I don't have to break out a slider. I still get 4K footage, and then I can just do that stuff from a product showcase. Ooh, I like that. Another goodie it has is focus transition. So you can set up 3 different focus points on the back of the screen and then just touch the screen with each of the different focus points, and will shift back and forth smoothly between, like racking focus for you. So you're basically in manual focus there, but let's say you have 2 people talking and they're at different distances. You can just click on one, then click on the other, click back on one. Just fantastic. Love that feature. You can not only load on custom LUTs, which is very helpful. I like to shoot with the Phantom LUTs or the Leeming LUT, depending on what situation I am in. So instead of looking at a gray old screen in Vlog, I can see the actual image itself. But not only can you do that, you can bake in the LUT to the footage. So if you just wanted to turn out that footage really fast, then you could do that. Or if you're, say, doing a streaming setup, you could just stream with your LUT already loaded in, and then you don't have to put it in OBS. And with the LUT monitoring, you can either output it to an external monitor or not output the LUT to an external monitor. Let's say if your external monitor already has a LUT loaded on. You know what I mean? Just, they give you the option. Anamorphic D-squeeze. With companies like Sirui coming out with affordable anamorphic lenses, a lot of people want to shoot anamorphic, and rightfully so. So this camera has the D-squeeze right there on the screen. You don't have to look at a weird image. You can just see it, and it also has stabilization for those anamorphic lenses. That is crazy. People who are anamorphic aficionados are gonna love this camera. This camera is also a great photo camera. 24 megapixels. You have a really nice sensor with great dynamic range. It is great in low light, and it can take a high resolution picture that is 96 megapixels. It combines 8 different pictures. It moves the sensor around a little bit, combines 8 pictures. You can get 96 megapixel photos. So you're doing architecture, stuff like that. Oh my goodness, such detail. Can take 9 frames per second with the mechanical shutter, or up to 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter. The images just pop. They're sharp. They're great, especially when you combine it with a nice lens like this one, the 24mm f1.8. This is one of their S lenses, and it was also sent over by Camera Canada, who have requested this lens back as well. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. One of my kids gave me yet another cold, and to think I filmed his birth with a Panasonic. So now let's get into the autofocus. Obviously, that was the big headline feature about this camera, that they finally put in a hybrid phase detect autofocus in there, and that is great. I've been waiting a long time for Panasonic, as many people have, and it is a very good and reliable autofocus system with a few caveats. Now, the face and eye autofocus works extremely well as long as you avoid this rectangle around your eyes. Basically, so it forms a crosshair around one eye and then a box around your face, but anytime something gets close to your eyes, not even necessarily covering up one or both, but if it gets right about here, things go out of focus. So there are people who've been complaining that the autofocus isn't quite as good in face and eye, but what's happening is probably they're talking with their hands, or they've moved an object that has come close to one of their eyes. And whereas like with the Sony, you basically have to cover up both eyes. Even if you cover up one eye, you're still going to have good autofocus. Now here's a test I did with some random woman I found in the alleyway close to my house, and if you put the color checker by her eye in the Panasonic, it will switch to the color checker if it gets close enough. With the Sony, you really have to cover up the eyes in order to get it to switch focus. And I did a test for myself here in the studio as well, and the same thing. It's just when you put it next to your eye, you just have to be careful not to get it too close to that imaginary rectangle that is basically around the tip of your nose to your eyebrows and right to about your ears. So if you avoid that, I find that you're fine. Now that does get worse if you're angled off, because say only one eye is visible, then it makes it easier for the camera to lose focus because that plane becomes longer this way. So anything held up right around here, you are going to lose the focus. Now, hopefully Panasonic will make that rectangle smaller, so like the Sony and the Canon, where it gets right on your eyeball, and that way it gets a little more sticky. And Panasonic are great with their firmware updates. The human and animal modes, they also work well, but that box increases. So if you get things, if you're shooting a human and something gets, say, closer to their face, you are going to lose focus on their face. But for wide shots, human and animal is absolutely great. For closer talking headshots, do the face and eye, and just be careful to avoid that little area. Now, a place the autofocus is not reliable is when it comes to tracking, at least in all of my tests. So first of all, you have to actually go in and set it to tracking. You can't just touch the screen to enable tracking like Canon and Sony. You have to go in and turn it into tracking mode, and then you have to turn the subject detection off. Because if they say you have a subject detection on a human, and you're trying to show an object, it's going to switch to that human because it will override it. So you turn off your subject detection, but even then, it sticks to the object sometimes, but not all of the time. And if you have several people in the frame, sometimes it jumps to a different person. So basically, for me, tracking, if I'm being paid, I am not going to use the tracking. If I have some bride coming down the aisle, I'm not just going to tap on her egotistical face and assume it's going to stay there. I would probably just use the joystick and pick an autofocus point close to her and just keep it on that way. But once again, hopefully Panasonic in firmware updates will improve the tracking. Currently, I don't find it particularly reliable. Now let's talk about the IBIS. The in-body image stabilization in this guy is absolutely fantastic. If you're doing 20 millimeters and up in video, it just looks so great. I say 20 millimeters and up because if you go below that, if you're going wider, you're going to start seeing some warping and wobbling in the corners. That's just a result of how good the IBIS is. The sensor is moving around a fair bit, so on those wide angles. This is a 14 millimeter Sigma lens, and as you can see, it is warping and wobbling. So for me, I always stick with 20 millimeters and then it looks good. Here's a little vlogging I did at 20 millimeters while I talk about the colors coming out of the Panasonic camera. So personally, if I am vlogging on the S5 II, I am going to use a 20 millimeter focal length, and that way you won't get too much warping and wobbling in the corners, but it's still a nice wide field of view when it comes to showing your gorgeous mug. The colors coming out of the standard profile are actually quite good on the Panasonic S5 II. I can just put it in its regular out-of-the-box mode and you still get quite a nice image if you see right here. Just ignore this part. Focus on the entire thing. I know, it is difficult. I love working with Vlog, but also the colors coming straight out of the camera are quite good. But like I said, 20 millimeters and up, if you're like doing 24, 35 and you're walking, it's so great. Just be careful when you're at those really wide modes. And the electronic stabilization, if you're wondering, I don't think that helps at all. It hurts actually at the wider end, and even when it's at the longer end, I don't find that it does much for the camera. I find the IBIS, the regular IBIS, it looks natural. There's less artifacts, less digital type of jitters. So I would leave the E-Stabilization off. The regular IBIS is plenty good. Now I'll talk about some of the drawbacks of the camera that you're going to want to be aware of before you purchase it, and that is if you're using the 6K and the 5.9K, which like I said, I want to do. If you're hooking up an external monitor, you're going to lose your face and eye autofocus, and that is really too bad. It switches to a center autofocus, and it is definitely not as reliable, and you're going to want to use a monitor a lot with this camera. And like I said, I like to use it to reframe, to zoom, so what I do is I set up my monitor, I get things the way I like, and then I unplug it and I press record, which is too bad. I'd like to be able to use the monitor with the camera. So if you want to do that, you're going to have to go down to the regular 4K. Then you don't get that extra resolution for your cropping, and you don't get that extra little bit of sharpness. Hopefully that can be fixed one day too. 120 frames per second, the slow motion in 1080 is seems to be contrast-based autofocus. It's not quite as reliable, which is too bad. The 4K 60 still comes in at a 1.5 times crop. Same thing with the A7 IV, but that is the case here. The white balancing, it has a pretty large square. When you're trying to manually white balance, you have to hold your gray card very close to the lens to fill it. And I wish it was a smaller square that you could move around like some of the other systems are doing. And also when you manually white balance, they don't tell you the temperature, so you don't know what Kelvin it is. I like it when I do the white balancing on the Sony and it tells me, like, I white balance in this room with the Sony, it's 5500. So I just set this lens and this camera always to 5500. With this camera here, if you had it on a different white balance, a different manual white balance setting, you wouldn't just be able to dial in 5500 because you'd have to reset your white balance. You know what I mean? And the last two are things that I've already mentioned: the wobbling in the corners at really wide angles, and the autofocus, the tracking not being so great, and the fact that the eye autofocus is not quite as small as some of the other systems. But that is it for the negative Nancy talk. That kind of hurt me to say it, because this, for $2,000, they have packed so much goodness, so much joy into this camera. It is hard not to recommend. I'm not saying it's the camera for you. Maybe there are deal breakers for it, and maybe you're in a different ecosystem. Like for me, I have a lot of Sony cameras, and I like to mix and match my APS-C lenses, my full frame lenses, my little cameras, my big cameras. You mix it in with the cinema cameras. It depends what ecosystem you're in, what type of lenses you're using, what type of things you're looking for. Maybe you use tracking all the time, and if that's the case, maybe this one isn't for you. But let's just say you had no cameras or no lenses. This is really hard not to recommend. So I recommend it. I mean, it's just got so much for $2,000, and the lens selection is pretty good on Panasonic. Between the Sigma, the Lumix, and the Leica, the L-mount Alliance, you can probably find some lenses that you are looking for at different focal lengths, and some of the lenses are pretty affordable for the quality that you are getting. It's not as fleshed out of a system as Sony, but is a more affordable system for the most part than, say, the Canon RF mount. So for me, I'm a camera channel. I do have a lot of cameras and from different brands, and even though I already have some Panasonic Micro Four Thirds, I think I'm gonna need an S5 II or an S5 IIX in my life with this 24mm as well. That's gonna hurt. That's gonna cost me a pretty penny, but I tell ya, I just love them. So what about you? Did you buy the S5 II? Do you want to buy the S5 II? If not, why? Write down below. And of course, a big thanks to Camera Canada for sending over the S5 II and the 24mm 1.8 S lens. They have been so great. I am going to miss them until I get them back here in the studio as soon as possible. So thanks, Camera Canada. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate you staying to the end. That makes you a fantastic human being. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.